Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Dana and this is Delighted to DIY. If you like thrift flips and budget home decor DIYs, why don't you consider hitting that red subscribe button. DIY number 1. For this first DIY, I took one of these mountain signs with the word dreaming on it from Dollartree and begun by using my metal scraper to remove the word from the front. When the word was off, I put it aside because I'm sure I'll be able to use it for a different DIY. But then I took my Rust-Oleum chalked paint in linen white and gave the entire piece 2 good coats, letting it dry in between. Then with 2 of these wooden pieces from a trellis I disassembled that I purchased at Dollarama, I'm going to take the nails out by hammering them out and then turning it over and pulling them out with pliers. I was able to use my multi-tool that you see here for both processes, as it's a hammer, a pair of pliers, it's got a utility knife, file, it's got so many things. I just love this tool. But that's how I removed the nails from the pieces. Then I took my sanding block from Dollar Tree and sanded the pieces down just to get rid of any of the rough edges. Next, I'm going to line up a piece underneath the side. So this time I'm doing the bottom and I mark with my pencil where I want to make some straight cuts. I had started by making mitered edges or angled cuts because I thought I could do mitered corners. But when it got to the peaks, it was rather difficult. So unfortunately, I'm going with a simpler route and showing you just how to do straight cuts. So again, you just kind of measure out and mark with your pencil where you need to make the cuts. I made them simply with my miter shears, as you see here, and then sand off the edges to just remove any of the roughness. So again, I'm just lining it up where it meets with the other piece and then marking with my pencil, making the cut with the miter shears, and I repeat this process all the way around. When I had all the pieces cut, I then start removing them, but I do it one at a time and mark them because each one fits into its own place kind of thing. So this one I'm marking with an R for the right side of the mountain, then I'll do a B for the bottom and an L for the left. And then the 2 peak pieces obviously are different sizes, so you don't really need to mark them. If you think you have a good memory and you'll remember where they go, by all means skip this step, but I knew I need to do this. Then with some burnt umber acrylic paint from Dollar Tree, I mixed it with some water and painted it on to all the pieces to give it a stained look. Then I went to my computer and made the printable that you saw that says Adventure Awaits with the trees below it. And I'm going to show you the transfer method. I scribbled on the back with my pencil and then traced over the letters onto the piece. The pencil will remain as you see here, leaving you with the wording so that you can trace it later on with a paint marker or Sharpie. I'm sure it would work as well. I'm going to show you 2 methods for the trees. One is, again, this transfer method of tracing over the trees onto your piece, and the pencil will be left behind so that you can go back and then fill it in with a paint marker, paintbrush, your choice. Another option is, as I'm doing here, and freehanding the trees just by copying them, like looking and copying and freehanding them. The choice is yours. Both work. It's whatever you're most comfortable with. Then I tried a few different options, but I decided to go with the Recollections chalk marker, even though to me it's more of a paint marker, but I did find them at Dollar Tree. I went with these to do my lettering and then began using it to start outlining the trees. But this is where, unfortunately, this DIY took a turn for the worse. I began using this chalk marker, paint marker, or whatever you want to call it. I began using it and things were going smoothly. Then it started to kind of wear out and die. So I was using the other paint marker that I got from Dollar Tree and it was going okay, but then it would begin to die. So in the end, it just looked like a hot mess. Here it is here. It just was not to my standard at all. So I do end up going in a different direction, but these methods typically do work. And if you're okay with this, by all means, then this will work for you. And I have used this method in the past and it has worked perfectly. I think it was just a lot of black and the paint markers just weren't working to the best of their abilities and not to my standard. Anyways, I will show you shortly what I did to change this up. So here I am just gluing on the border pieces. I used my Gorilla Glue. It's in the quick set version, and I just used some dots around on the frame or on the picture and then held the frame pieces onto it. So here I am. I went to my computer and printed out my printable after trying to paint up and cover the trees and making it all smeared and a mess, because I was going to try and redo the transfer method, but it was just not working. I was in kind of a time crunch. So unfortunately, the quickest method for me to finish this project, to have it to a nice looking piece, was to print it out on printer paper and get it cut down to size. I did this by kind of just pushing it into the frame and then cutting and then just trimming it down and cutting, trimming down and cutting. So now I'm just gluing it on with a glue stick as I find I get the least crinkles, wrinkles, and bubbles. And then any that was kind of still sticking up or was too big, I just used my utility knife, as you see here, to cut off any of the excess paper and to get a nice clean finish on the inside. If you like these DIYs, why don't you consider giving it a thumbs up or subscribing for more? Make sure you stay tuned to see what I do with some moss wreaths. DIY number 2. For this next DIY, we're going to start with a wooden bead garland and plastic gloves because it does get a little messy, but we're going to stain the garland. In the jar, I have Minwax water-based stain in American walnut, and I start by putting the entire garland into the jar and shaking it up with the lid on. I then carefully removed the strand of beaded garland and shook off any of the excess carefully and then put it onto a paper towel and then used another paper towel to kind of dry off and blot off any of the excess stain. On my computer, I made this printable that says may be found near lakes and rivers because the beaver is a Canadian symbol that can be found near lakes and rivers. So this is how I go about doing the printing on tissue paper. I usually print it first on a regular piece of printer paper to see where it's going to print. Then I cut down my tissue paper and tape it on with masking tape. Next, I took one of these wooden tags that I picked up at Dollarama, and luckily it was a nice white on the back, so this is the side I'm going to use. So here is the printable I made now that it's been printed onto the tissue paper, and I've lined it up to as center as possible. Again, I like to eye things, not measure things, but if you want to measure, by all means. I'm taping it down with masking tape just so that it stays in place while I put on a layer of glue stick and then tap it down, mostly from the insides out. Today's video is part of the Around the World collaboration with not one, not two, but 23 amazing, super talented creators. As well, there will be a giveaway. All you have to do is watch all the videos and comment the word world in the comment box, and I'll leave more about the giveaway in my description box below. Once the printable is glued down with the glue stick, I removed the masking tape and then used a regular paintbrush and my matte decoupage and gave it a layer on top to seal everything in. When everything was dry, I used my sanding block from Dollartree to sand off the edges of the tissue paper to give it a nice clean finish. I do this in a downwards motion along the edges of whatever piece I'm sanding. In this case was this wooden tag. To cover up the bit at the top that wasn't covered with tissue paper, I'm going to use this cork looking ribbon from Dollartree and just cover it up. It was the perfect size, and I thought it was really natural type looking, and that's kind of what I was going for with these DIYs. They're Canadian inspired by mountains and trees and animals that we have here in Canada. So I just laid it down, cut it down to size, then turned it over, used my pencil to mark out where I needed to make the trims or make the cuts, the angle cuts, then just would relay it down to make sure it was the right size. I made one more little trim, then used my pencil here to mark where the hole is. Then I took a small pair of scissors to make the hole. I just put my scissors one end through the ribbon very carefully. Do this carefully. Please don't cut yourself. Don't stab your finger behind it. Once I had a hole started, then I just used a wooden skewer to kind of round it out. Once this was done, I used some hot glue to glue it down. Once it was glued down, I just made sure it was fitting nicely on the back. I had to make a couple more little trims with my scissors, and that was it. Then I just used the hot glue for any of the little pieces or little ends that weren't quite glued down, because I didn't want any of the glue seeping out. So I left the glue a little bit away from the edge, and then now I'm going back with little bits, hopefully not getting it everywhere. Next, with the dried garland, I'm just kind of breaking up the pieces. Some of the beads dried together, so it just took a little bending and wiggling to loosen them all. However, it also snapped the cord that it was on, so I wasn't intending to restring these beads, but I had to after all, so I just put some masking tape on a piece of jute and strung the beads all on, then put it through the hole front to back and tied a double knot. After tying the knot, I then rethreaded the string back up 2 beads. I meant to do 3, but I only did 2, and then trimmed off the excess jute. For the other end of the garland, we're going to be adding a tassel that we're going to make. I'm sure you've seen many people do it, but here's how I do it. I wrap jute around my hand as many times as I feel is right, sometimes more, sometimes less. For this thickness of jute, I believe I did 15 wraps around my hand, then cut off the excess. Then I slide it off my hand in the oval shape, keeping it all together, and put it down on the table. Then with the end of the beaded garland, the string, I usually cut excess. I tie on the tassel. So I do a double knot, and I do this at the top of the oval, opposite where the cutoff piece ends. So you can see that cutoff piece kind of hanging up. If you were to see how I put it down, it ends opposite where we're making the knot currently. Next, I take a separate piece of jute that I've cut off my ball and go about half an inch, quarter of an inch. It all depends on the length of your tassel, but you go down a little bit from the knot you've just made, and I tie off a double knot again. So there I'm just showing you, for me, I think it was about half an inch I went down for the head of the tassel. I guess that's what we're making. And anyways, I use, like I said, a separate piece of jute and just do a double knot. I trim one of them kind of short, so I had to cut it off. Otherwise, if you have a long enough piece, it can become part of your tassel strings. So this piece that I'm cutting, I cut to the length of the tassel because it was long enough, but the other one, unfortunately, as you see here, is too short, so I cut it down. Maybe I don't show that, sorry. Next, I take my scissors and I just cut the bottom loops that we have that were the opposite end of where the knot was. And these are going to be our little tassel fringes. So anything here, I think I do show you. So yes, this piece from the knot we just tied on around the tassel wasn't long enough to look like it was part of the tassel fringes. So I just cut it off close to the knot. Then I just hold them all together and give it a little trim to neaten it up and tidy it up. And that's it. That's how I make my tassels. I hope my tassel tutorial was easy for you to follow. I tried to do it in as much of a slow version as possible and hopefully as clearly as possible explaining it. But if you do have any questions, let me know down in your comments, in the comments below. To finish off this DIY, I just wrapped some masking tape around the end of the jute that we used to tie the tassel onto our beaded garland and rethreaded it back up 3 beads and then cut off the excess jute. And then if you want to finish it off further, you probably should have done it before tying on the jute, but you could add brown paper to the back of this DIY, and that is it. I hope you're enjoying these wilderness-inspired DIYs, and you'll have to let me know your favorite in the comments below. DIY number 3. For this last DIY, we're going to start with a garden dish from Dollar Tree and 2 of the moss wreaths, the larger size and the smaller size. I believe the smaller is 8-inch and the larger is a 10-inch size. I'm going to take these out of the package and take them out to my garage where I'm going to use the Varathane Diamond Wood Finish. Because I didn't have hairspray on hand, I would probably suggest using it because it's cheaper and probably works just as good, but I gave it a spray to hopefully hold on as much of the moss as possible so it doesn't make as much of a mess, but I will warn you, this is a messy DIY. The moss gets pretty much everywhere. Anyways, we are going to take some more of the wooden pieces from the trellis that I took apart that I got at Dollarama, and I'm going to cut them down at 3.5-inch increments. So I just use my ruler, mark it off, then use my miter shears to make the cuts. It cut through this stuff really easily. So I made 8 cuts of 3.5 inches long. Then with some of the same burnt umber acrylic paint and water mixture, we're going to stain all parts of these pieces, front, back, sides, everywhere. And then I just painted it on, and I don't believe I rubbed it off. I just painted this stuff on. So I didn't do the ends because I'm hoping the glue will adhere better without anything on the ends, but we will finish them up further on in the project. So just look for whichever end or whichever side looks the best, have it pointing up, and then I'm using my Gorilla Quick Set glue, super glue, to glue these into a square shape. So I just glue them on one at a time, putting the glue on the end of a piece and then putting it onto the end of another, and go all the way around till you have a nice square. So I did this with all 8 pieces, making 2 squares. For the last piece, I put some glue on one of the ends of raw wood that is part of the 3 pieces that are already glued together, then some onto the raw wood of the piece we are attaching on, and that's how I finished off the 3rd piece, or like the final 4th piece. Taking 4 of these 12-inch, 3/8-inch dowels that I got in a 6-pack from Dollarama, we are going to be connecting the 2 squares to make a lantern. I just showed what some of the larger size dowels look like from Dollar Tree as a comparison. They're about 6 inches. These are 12 and quite a bit thicker in diameter. So I just held it into one of the corners of the 2 squares and found the height I liked, then marked it with a pencil and cut it down again with my miter shears, which cut through this very easily. So once I had cut one, I used it as my guide for the other 3. Then to hold them in place, we're going to use hot glue. So I put some hot glue into the corner where the 2 pieces of frame meet, and then held in the dowel as best as possible into that glue. Any of the glue that did seep up, you see me here, I just try to wipe it away to keep it as clean looking as possible. So here I am again, just putting some some hot glue into the corner where the 2 pieces of frame meet, and then I hold the dowel in. Anything that seeps up, I'm doing the smart thing and using a wood skewer to get it off rather than my finger, because I did burn myself the first time. Then to help hold them and put a little more adherence and security, I went back and put some hot glue on either side of all the dowels to help just make it a little stronger. Then, removing the sticker from the glass dish, we're going to move on to the other part of this DIY, which we will now add hot glue around the edge as best as possible. I'm kind of sloppy, but hopefully you take your time and try to keep it as close to the edge as possible, because we're going to be gluing the larger of the two moss wreaths into place. And the hot glue will show, it's not super noticeable, so don't worry too much, but keep it as clean as possible. Once the larger wreath is in place, then I use my hot glue to glue the 8-inch wreath on top of it. I did this in little sections, gluing and holding all the way around. And then anything, again, that seeped out or was visible, I used the wooden skewer to just kind of push the hot glue in, and also kind of just to add on any of the loose moss. Then I tried cleaning out the bowl as best as possible all around to get as much of the loose moss that had fallen in out. And then I took some river rocks that I had gotten for free off Facebook to fill up the base. Using some of the small rocks from Dollartree, I used hot glue and glued one on in each spot all the way around till the two wreaths were lined in between with the small pebbles. Back to the lantern, I used the burnt umber acrylic paint and water mixture to stain the raw wood ends that were showing and remaining on the top and bottom base. Then I decided to create a top for the lantern. So I took some of the 6-inch dowel sticks from Dollartree this time and held it up to the top of the lantern, marked with my pen the length I needed to fit across it, then cut it down. I did 7 for the top, and then we're going to use 2 more to glue along the ends just to kind of finish it up and make it look a little more neat and tidy. Using my hot glue, I put little dabs on either end of where the dowels are going to sit. So you see me here, putting 2 little dots. Try and keep it as small as possible so none of the glue seeps out. Once I did the 2 ends, I did 1 in the middle and then 2 in between those on each side on the left and right of that middle one. I just eyeballed, but you can again measure if you want it more precise. And then we're going to take the final 2 sticks, all the same length, and I put a little dab of glue on each end of the top dowels, and we're going to put a stick on that and then do the same thing for the other end. To finish off this DIY, I just wiggled the lantern into the middle of the piece and added a candle in. Of course, because there is dowels on top, I wouldn't suggest burning an actual candle, but a faux candle would be fine. If you like these DIYs, it'd be awesome if you gave it a thumbs up or considered sharing this video with friends. Also, if you want to see more thrift flips and DIYs, budget DIYs, why don't you consider subscribing by hitting that red button. Thanks for watching. Bye.